The beauty of a mushroom can mask a beast within. A distrust of these earthy excrescences has evolved over the centuries. Medieval herbalists could not explain them, but found in the writings of the Greeks and Romans many tales of the delights and dangers of such strange, newfangled meats. To eat or not to eat? That was the question. Wrote one, "The meadow mushrooms are in kind the best. It's ill trusting any of the rest." To the superstitious medieval mind, the phenomenon of fungus seemed supernatural. The toadstool readily accepted as an occult symbol, central to a mystic world of devil's spit and devil's bunions, toad's cheese and witch's butter. Around the so-called fly agaric, there were woven 100 tales of death and ecstasy, of ritual inebriation and convulsive frenzy. To a fertile imagination, so elegant a structure must be possessed of magical powers, a magic to be seen in all these venomous fruits, and in the inexplicable suddenness of their coming. Endlessly varied in color and shape, they spring up unseen. But how and from where? They are the effect, but what is the cause? The simplest answer for centuries was that they were the work of the devil. Everyone knew of the fairy rings. When St. George's mushrooms appeared in the meadows around St. George's Day, some were clearly arranged in a ring, and the ring was visible as a lusher growth of the grass, even when the mushrooms were not there. It had to be the result of lightning, or thunder, or ants, or moles, or witches, or fairies, or the devil. Who could possibly have guessed back then that beneath the ring some unseen organism might be stimulating the grass to grow? It was far easier to conjure a dance of witches in the mind, and yet the answers lay under everyone's nose. There are fairy rings in a jar of jam, each spreading circle a living fungus feeding on the jam. And whether mold or mushroom, whether growing in forest, meadow, kitchen, or laboratory, most fungi start life in the same way. On this special jelly, 80 or so similar colonies are feeding and growing. 3 separate rings have been allowed to grow on this one. Different species, different colors. Each species spreading out to digest the meal provided. For some, the meal will be animal, and it could be you. That ringworm and the fairy ring have much in common. As can be seen from the air, fairy rings may expand to huge diameters as the fungus in the soil grows inexorably outwards. The link between mushroom and what's in the soil is that they are one. The mushroom is the outward visible sign of its inward invisible spawn, or mycelium, as scientists call it. Essentially, this fluffy tangle could be any species of fungus, growing through jam, soil, wood, almost anything. These microscopic threads insinuate the fungus within the substance of whatever it's evolved to feed on. A fungus spreads through its food, not increasing in bulk, like a growing animal or plant, but making a continual movement through new areas, digesting its surroundings with juices exuded by its mycelium of threads. Inside these tubes streams its living protoplasm, absorbing nourishment from the very decay it causes. When one mycelium meets another of the same species, they may join. Sometimes such a mating results in the making of special devices, either for a sort of hibernation or for spreading the fungus away from the parents. If the food supply is exhausted or the surroundings are becoming hostile, it's essential that a seed-like structure called a spore be grown, so the fungus can evade the hazard or get moved elsewhere to start a new colony. In this mole, the survival capsule or spore is forming at the junction of two threads. It'll be protected by a thick wall and those spiky outgrowths. These spores will not travel. Their strategy is to lie dormant, to hibernate until conditions are right to grow. The other strategy is to escape into the air. Mushrooms of whatever form are simply devices for producing and distributing spores. Emerging from mycelia that have met and mated, they carry developing spores aloft, and from the convoluted areas of their so-called gills, release them in a blizzard of unbelievable proportions. Each tiny spore a speck of protoplasm falling from the recesses of the gills. Each face of every gill is covered with budding spores. If the gills of a fair-sized mushroom could be laid out flat, the spore-producing surface would be as big as the lid of a garbage can. The spores grow out on tiny stalks from special cells. By some still obscure mechanism, each spore is shot off its stalk and falls under gravity from between the gills. Once outside the mushroom, they are caught in clouds and wafted on their mission. Invisible, they float away, perhaps on epic journeys in the upper air, perhaps to fall quite soon to Earth. From a multitude of launch pads, such voyagers set out. They fall in millions from the brackets and crust that jut from the rotting fabric of the woods. Time capsules of as varied shape as the diversity of fungi that bore them. Their mission? To colonize, to spread whatever blight or canker each might represent, and so ensure that the substantial pageant of life on our planet does dissolve and leaves not a trace behind. And besides this drift of invisible smoke from precisely oriented gills and pores, there is, among another kind of fungi, a more explosive way of launching spores. Sitting in the stagnant air close to the ground, such flattened discs or cup fungi must shoot up their salvos of spores to be caught on a passing breath of air. Cup and club fungi of astonishing variety share this explosive technique. So all the strange excrescences that proliferate, sometimes overnight, are devices to shower spores on the world. Countless millions die, but some find a place to germinate and grow. And so the inexorable cycle moves on, and the pattern of fungal life is seen more clearly. The new colony feeds and spreads, and as it runs out of food, prepares to release its spores yet again. This fungus bears microscopic pinheads full of spores, but there are fungi whose design and mechanisms can startle us with their wonder. Climbing out of the soil, or whatever the mycelium of the fungus is growing in, is half the battle. The Earth Star's bag of spores now awaits a fortuitous thump, perhaps from a falling twig. It can do nothing more on its own. A cluster of puffballs awaits the heavy drip of rain percolating through the woodland canopy. Raindrops are also vital to what's called the bird's nest fungus. It's hard to believe that these cups are a form of fungus at all. The eggs in the nest are in fact packets of spores that need the sudden flood of a raindrop to scoop them out of the nest. Nearly out. And there one goes. The packet will dry and perhaps be nibbled by insects, and so release the spores. The heavyweight champion of the third kingdom, the giant puffball. If each of the several billion spores in this fungus were laid out side by side, they'd stretch around the Earth 4 or 5 times. If each became a giant puffball, it's believed they might outweigh our planet 800 times. Thankfully, most of this dust will not survive. This is a game they even played in ancient Greece. Another Olympic game was putting the shot, but these missiles aren't lead. They're only the size of a mustard seed. But they're thrown violently from their fungal bed. The sphere-throwing fungus needs no help to fire off its spore balls. It's literally a gun, a mortar discharged by sudden flexing of a membrane, like a catapult. It's said to make a slight sound, giving it a reputation as not only the largest and most powerful, but also the loudest of all the fungus guns. The stealthy eruption of a stinkhorn contrasts with the violence of the sphere throwers. The honeycomb-like stem expands in about an hour and carries the spore-bearing head clear of the surrounding litter. In this case, though, it's not to allow the spores to catch a breeze. The stinkhorn's technique is more like a flower's, to summon insects to disperse them. To do so, it starts to stink. Its fetid odor, like rotting flesh, permeates the wood. The magnetism of so vile a scent brings flies to feed on its evil succulence. Each fly sucks up the slimy brew of spores, and spores get stuck to legs and bodies. On innumerable wings, the stinkhorn's progeny are spirited abroad. To the flies, the stinkhorn is a kind of luxury. They can survive without meeting one. But there are insects completely reliant on a fungal friend. This ambrosia beetle is one. The beetle lives in dead timber. It's an efficient borer and burrows deep into the dead trunk. Cut open the wood, and the main tunnels and side galleries are revealed darkly stained. The larvae of the beetle are developing in those dark side chambers. The dark stain is caused by the growth of a fungus on the walls of the tunnels, a fungus that was brought into the tunnels by the beetle. Both larvae and adult beetles are in the midst of food they cannot eat. They're unable to digest the cellulose in the surrounding timber. But the fungus can, and the beetles can eat the fungus. So they move knee-deep in their own edible fungus garden. This micro-undergrowth was once thought purely fortuitous, like ambrosia, the food of the gods, and that's how the beetle got its name. The spores of this fungus, which grow on the very structures that the beetles browse, are caught in pouches on the beetle's body as it brushes past, and so are transported. The beetle needs this fungus, and the fungus needs the beetle to inject it deep into the dead timber, where it flourishes on the byproducts of the beetle. Of course, only the fruits of the fungus are found in the tunnels. Its thread-like mycelium is out of sight. It's branching through the tissues of the timber in true fungus style, rotting the dead wood away. A similar fungus, carried by a different beetle, caused the recent widespread demise of the elm tree. In elm disease, the fungus is active within a living tree. It's a deadly parasite spread by an insect. Sick elms become all too easy to spot, leafless at the height of summer. Many fungi, with help or alone, can infect living trees. The size of the fleshy brackets, which are the fruit body, are a measure of the rot within, the plunder of the wood by the parasitic mycelium, which makes these sinister but beautiful launch pads for the spores. All fungi need their food pre-packaged. They can't make their own as plants do. These parasites conveniently take their food from the leaf that makes it, and then they may kill the hand that feeds them. But there are fungi that are good for trees. The mycelia of many toadstools help to rot the litter of dead leaves to a residue upon which the roots of the trees can feed. And there are others, like this chanterelle and the old man of the woods, whose close association with a tree is, amazingly, essential for the health of both. But just as the devil has all the best tunes, so the parasites attract most attention, not only for their flamboyant exuberance on a living tree, but even when they begin to rot its corpse away in dead earnest. Beneath such an onslaught, the woodland is crumbled into dust. The badges of decay are worn by every stick. There seems no limit to the diversity and opportunism of this tribe. On occasion, they'll devour each other. Toadstools from another toadstool grow. The mysterious lichen is a fungus trick, for within its fabric there hide the green cells of a lowly plant, an alga that sits there and makes a meal for two in the sunlight, thus keeping both itself and its supporting fungus partner in good shape. A fungus sucks the corpse of a caterpillar dry. Another kills a luckless fly, permeates its body with its threads, then scatters spores abroad, perhaps to claim a further victim on the wing. Fungus can even digest the tough chitin of an insect's frame. Many a gardener will cheer to see an aphid falling victim in this way. This is a mold that kills them effectively. It could be that one day, by spraying a solution of the spores of such a mold, aphids ravaging the chrysanthemums will become a plague of the past. But while we may laugh at that success, behind our backs and under our floors, the notorious dry rot muffles and consumes our homes. A silent invader, permeating our dwellings, hanging malevolently, infesting a room with its spores. Our camera, too, is vulnerable, for there are fungi that can scratch a living on the apparent desert of its lens. The etchings of such a tenacious mold are a photographer's nightmare. And even film is vulnerable. On this color slide taken 20 years ago, a colony grows in the sky. It feeds on the jelly-like photographic emulsion. Such threads may one day consume even the substance of the very film you're watching. But on the plus side, consider dung. Fungi are crucial to its disposal. And not only cows, but dogs, cats, horses, mice, in fact, every animal is potentially covering the world with dung. And yet, it does disappear. There's an orchestra of organisms performing the symphony of its destruction. And not only those that fly in. A cowpat comes ready primed with an ensemble of microbes from the third kingdom, including the fungi. This hiker's hazard may take a month or two to rot, depending on the season, but it's in everyone's interest that it should. Cow dung is largely undigested grass, and the rotting cycles its remains back into the grass. The dung is shot through with the ever-spreading threads of different fungal colonies. They grow mini-cups and micro-mushrooms, a kaleidoscope of forms, in succession shedding spores that drift from this dungscape to another. There are fungi in a cowpat that need to get back into a cow, but understandably, the cows are inclined to avoid their own smelly products. They'll not graze close to them. What's been called a ring of repugnance exists around each one, a band of ungrazed grass. But this fungus must get its spores eaten in order to get back into fresh dung. It uses tiny guns to shoot its spores across that repugnant gap onto grass that the cow will eat. Those black caps full of spores will be shot away on jets of fluid when those transparent bubbles burst. Sensitive to light, they actually bend to shoot their caps through spaces between surrounding plants. Seen speeded up, each gun grows and fires like this. A cowpat may support an artillery of these water pistols firing in concert, hurling their caps to fresh pastures. A spore's throw away, the tiny missiles land and stick tight to a juicy blade, and there they wait. Ahead lies an internal journey, but unaffected by digestive juices, the spores will pass through to reach fresh dung. And there's even an odder story here. A mass of microscopic worms consumes this mess. Nematodes, or roundworms they're called. Some are parasites of the cow, and there's one type, a lungworm, that exploits the mechanism of the cap-throwing fungus. It shares that need to get back into a cow. The juvenile lungworms must climb the fungus gun. They're probably moving up towards light. They'll then hitch a ride within the cannonball of spores. As the cannons fire, the worms inside the caps will also be hurled beyond the ring of repugnance. They'll complete the cycle of their lives within the cow. A tiny worm exploits a fungus, but there are fungi about which can trap such a worm. A deadly snare lies in wait for a victim. The filaments of this fungus in the soil bear many such nooses. The fungus probably grows them when there are worms about. Each noose consists of just 3 cells that undergo a remarkable change when triggered by contact with the worm. That worm is already trapped, and in a moment, this one will stick its head into a noose or two. Once held, there's no escape. The inflated cells constrict the body in a deadly embrace. The snare may not trigger immediately. This potential victim may yet go free. But watch the ring closely. It triggers, swells, and grips. The fungus will now grow into the animal and spread its mycelium to feed throughout its body. In this competitive broth of compost and soils, a predatory fungus able to grab a passing meal is perhaps a jump ahead of others who merely wait for a corpse to come their way. Likewise, the fungi can get a jump ahead of us. The mildews grabbing our roses, the blights shriveling through our greenhouses, flourish on the bounty we provide. Any crop-loving fungus can reap its own harvest faster than we can. The smuts and rusts that can blight everything we grow are constant reminders that this third kingdom preys on us. Mildews scramble over wilting leaves. But the so-called rusts plunder deep within our cereal grasses, sapping their vigor. In time, they erupt on the surface of leaves and release from gaping pustules their infectious powder. So we fight back, but this is not a modern war. It's an age-old battle for survival. Our stored grain may be attacked by a mold and become discolored, even poisonous. But that's perhaps the strategy of the mole, to steal that food from us. Before our agriculture was born, that same mold might have competed with a rodent for possession of its hoard of seed. It's been suggested that 3 tasks face this mole. First, to make more of itself by feeding on the grain. Second, to hold off rival moles. And third, to repel the mouse and therefore win the battle for possession. It's perhaps that devastating strategy that's plagued mice and men for centuries. One fungus laid claim to the potato and turned the tide of history. In the 1840s, the Irish starved or fled when a malady which rotted the potato spread to Ireland. Potatoes were all that many people ate then, and were an unreliable crop at best. But in those exceptionally rainy years, this vital crop collapsed. Since there was no real knowledge of what caused any disease, this decay was blamed on the rain, or even the railway engine, that recent invention of the devil. Paradoxically, it was a minister of the church, the Reverend Barclay, who rejected the supernatural explanations of the day. An authority on fungi, he propounded a revolutionary theory in suggesting that the fungus in the plant was the cause of the disease and not just an effect of it. More than a century later, our knowledge of just how this blight spreads from leaf to leaf is getting more complete. Tiny packets of spores burst open in water on the surface of a leaf. The packets arrived on a breeze, but rain has made their breaking possible. And in the 1840s, there was no shortage of rain. The water is essential, for the tiny spores swim. Soon they'll aggregate into a ball. Now they germinate, and their threads infect the tissues of the plant. A tragic tale for Ireland, but one that gave New York an Irish cop on every corner. A blight once fell upon the British Navy, too. The forests were cut to build these wooden walls, and the toadstools followed their green timber to sea and frequently rotted them to the bottom. The blotches of a diesel-eating fungus can clog filters and block pipes. This one stopped these patrol ships of the modern Navy in their tracks. That fungus should so subtly attack our defenses must give us new cause to fear the molds. The third kingdom can consume our modern world of plastic, oil, and glass. Inside the steel boxes which formed the roadway of this bridge, a mold was seen which caused consternation among those who might have to breathe the air around it. Fears were allayed when it was realized that it wasn't this dread growth, whose spores cause aspergillosis of the lung, but some lesser fuzz eating at the paintwork. All the same, there are hazards in some pipes. Think of an unlikely place for a fungus to grow, and it may prove ideal. The interior of bagpipes is just such an environment, full of moist air. Moreover, the bag is customarily kept airtight by lining it with a sticky liquid, inevitably supplemented with spit. On such a brew lives this. It too can infect the lungs and lay a sickly piper low. It's said we start to die as soon as we are born, and certainly there are fungi ready to rot us before we go. That athletic itch between the toes is this mycelium when it's creeping through the skin. Quite dull to view, but on the toenails grow these colorful delights. Some kill, others cure. Even the cautious herbalist would praise the one that was good for those that are bit by venomous beasts, or, like this one, good as a poultice for the inflamed eye. But in Alexander Fleming's laboratory, the most famous cure-all gave hint of its existence. Out of the air came this very mold. It's still kept alive today. Called Penicillium notatum, it settled on a culture plate, and Fleming observed its power to kill some bacteria around it. It killed with a chemical called penicillin, the miracle drug of the age. And a similar mold flavors cheese. Another Penicillium spreads its mycelium through Stilton, its green spores mottling it that characteristic hue. Its rotting produces the flavor we love, enjoyed perhaps with the juice of grapes, wine, itself sometimes flavored by other fungi that ravage grape skins. And it's a fungus that conducts the ferment. Yeast, one of the oddest. Just a single cell that in the juice divides into a string of beads again and again, becoming a mass of cells. The yeast feeds as it grows in the juice and makes carbon dioxide gas and alcohol. It's claimed that in nature, producing alcohol is the yeast's attempt to defend itself and its food. A strategy that here has failed. We put yeast to work in bulk. The beer maker's ancient craft exploits the fungus, though in some ways it's a partnership, for the yeast is very well fed for its trouble. Beer is not essential to survival, though there are those who would have us believe otherwise. Likewise, fungi are used to supplement or decorate a dish. To eat or not to eat, that was the ancient question. Certainly, the morel that blooms in the spring is tasty both to us and to others. The fact that other animals will eat what might be poisonous is no guide to safety. Neither the fly agaric nor this death cap is for our eating, so you can forget the old wives' tales, for their tests suggest this poisoned toadstool is safe. True safety lies in mushrooms cultivated by experts. These grow where once they mined stone to build the city of Bath, England. Now they quarry mushrooms from their beds by the ton. Commercial mushrooms are grown in caves, sheds, and railway tunnels throughout the world, a tribute to our conservative taste in fungi. Or is it just that ancient caution once again? New types are already being introduced. The oyster mushroom, for example. It looks a little different in the pan, but it's certainly quite safe to eat. As autumn colors up the woods, a larder door is swinging open, and yet few people care or will even notice that there's food out here for free. Of those who do, the interest may be professional. Michael Madeline of Bristol University is a botanist. He's seeking out all types of fungi in preparation for a foray with his students. He knows this third kingdom well. His academic knowledge gives him courage now and then to have a go at eating something novel, but he always makes quite sure he knows exactly what it is. There are others in the woods who look only for the unusual foods. They hunt with a confident knowledge born more of tradition than training. Fritz Kish and his wife Lilo are Czechoslovakian by birth, but for many years now they look to British woods to provide delicacies for their table. There's no better way of building confidence at mushroom hunting than by swapping hunters' tales, but it's well worth heeding the warnings of the dangers. Michael Madeline.
This one, which unfortunately has been damaged in collecting, is the most lethal fungus that you could possibly find. This is the death cap. One of these is probably enough to do in a couple of people if they ate this completely. And the danger with it is that although for maybe the first half dozen hours or so you don't feel any effects, probably after about 10 or 12 hours sickness sets in and you have a day of sickness and general unpleasantness. Then there may be signs of recovery, but what has been happening in the meantime is that the toxins in this have been attacking your liver, and probably by the third or fourth day, you're liable to become seriously ill and usually die as a result of liver damage. The point that this partly brings out, though, is the need to be so precise in getting the features right. This thing here looks very similar, and yet that, which is another amanita, is not a poisonous one.
Get the features wrong and you're dead, a fear that keeps most of us on supermarket mushrooms. So how did Fritz learn?
Well, I grew up with them. When I was a boy in Czechoslovakia, my father, who was a country doctor, took me on long walks through the woodlands and showed me what he considered safe to eat. I didn't learn to take a very great variety of fungi in those childhood days of mine, because my father, being a doctor and having had personal experience with poisoning, was very conservative, and where he wasn't absolutely certain, he wouldn't allow me to take them.
You mean he'd had patients who died or suffered illness from eating these?
I remember one particular tragedy that occurred in my small hometown, where a family of 5 people, patients of my father's, all died of fungi poisoning. The only survivor was the poor old grandmother who was off her food that day.
It's little wonder Fritz sticks cautiously to those he's sure of, such as this Boletus.
It's quite unmistakable when you're used to taking them. I didn't know it as Boletus badius, which I've since learned that it is, but it gives you a kind of thrill when you see it in the distance, standing on the floor of the woodlands. Of course, it isn't absolutely definite when you only see the top of the cap. When you gather it, turn it over, you see the pores underneath, typical to the Boletus family. Yes. Then you can be certain what it is.
Yes. In this basket here with a mixed assortment of fungi, there are some other edible ones. I wonder whether, in fact, you've tried these, Lilo. This is a beefsteak, which I've tried. Have you ever had this one?
No, I've tried.
Very obvious reason. Look at that. It's a bracket where it's been split open. If I cut this across here, look at that. It's just like a slice of raw liver.
Yes. Gracious me.
It looks very meat-like, But the taste is really quite unexpected because it's slightly acidic, rather like fried apple, if you can imagine that. I can't say it's one that I enthuse about, but it is edible. You haven't had that?
No, I've never tried that, no.
What about the parasol fungus?
No, I'm afraid I've never tried that either.
No?
I knew about its edibility, but I've never risked putting it to the test.
Yes.
We shall certainly try it now.
Of course, the worry with this is that seeing that ring around it, immediately you're liable to think, is it an ammonite or is it poisonous? But they're very distinctive, and if I break the stalk off, you're left there with this rather beautiful, it's not going to break, this beautiful cap, which is very good eating, cooked in butter. It's delicious.
It looks worth having, too, of that size.
Yes.
Despite such talk, no doubt the old attitude of unbridled fear will last, as it should. In short, unless you're 100% sure, don't eat wild mushrooms. There remains within this realm one more sinister surprise, one further testament of decay. A mold that moves, slowly and with uncanny ease, slipping into almost animal form, engulfing all it meets. No roots, no stem, no leaves, no flower, no legs, no head, no eyes, no mouth, just a scarcely perceptible ooze. A slime mold moves, digesting the world with a rhythm all its own. They seem to reach from the third kingdom into the animal realm and then return as they transform into more fungal form to shed their spores. Fungi are no longer thought to be formed from mud and the acrid juices of moist earth, yet they still retain that medieval air of mystery. They reach persistently for everything we know and remind us of our own inevitable decay. They are the life that follows death. And so that's the rotten world about us, more perhaps than you cared to know. But if we sparked your interest in wild mushrooms, please remember our warning. Never eat one unless you know it's safe. I'm George Page for Nature.